The Summer Games Minute, brought to you by Mass Mutual. For most professional athletes, versatility means they can play a few different positions in a single sport. For Babe Dietrichson-Zaharias, versatility means dominance across the entire spectrum of sport. In the 1932 Summer Games in Los Angeles, Zaharias won gold in the 80-meter hurdles and the javelin throw, plus she got a silver in the high jump. Running, throwing, jumping wasn't enough for Babe, so she became a competitive billiards player, then jumped into professional golf, winning 10 major championships, all the while making a few pitching appearances in Major League Baseball spring training games. Mass Mutual understands the nuances in how women want and need to manage their finances. With quality product solutions and guidance, a Mass Mutual financial professional can help you plan for both short-term and long-term money goals. Learn more and get started at massmutual.com.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
The Athletic.
The 2024 MotoGP season is about to start, so the only appropriate thing for the Race MotoGP podcast to do is to start an argument between ourselves over what might happen during it. So for our pre-season predictions this year, we have tasked ourselves with predicting the final top 10 in the Riders' Championship in 40,000 races and 10 months' time, whatever it is when we get to Valencia in November. As well as regulars Simon Patterson, Valentin, Khorounzhiy and myself, Matt Beer, we brought in Glenn Freeman, our boss, to join the panel for this one. And we each secretly submitted our top 10 predictions, and I then applied the MotoGP Grand Prix race scoring system to them to come up with our definitive guess for how the 2024 title fight is going to turn out. So I'm going to reveal at the outset, and this is great for variety after last week where Val and Simon agreed on every single thing about the 2025 grid. Not a single rider has got the same position from all of us. We've all got a little bit different and everything, and there's a few decent fluctuations. I don't want any of you to give away anything in detail about your predictions just yet, but as an opening question, I'd like to ask, which of your predictions position-wise are you most confident in, and which is your hilarious punt? Glenn, as the guest, you can go first.
Oh, that's an honour. Thanks for having me again. Means I didn't mess up. Was it the top 10 riders I was on last time?
Yeah, you skewed it, but in a good way.
Yeah, okay. You've forgiven me for my Danny Pedrosa pick. Anyway, to answer your question, so which one am I most confident in? That's the harder one to answer. But I'm going to say my fourth place. Okay. I'm very confident in that one. And what was the other one? What's my hilarious
which one are you least confident in?
Oh, God.
That you can justify?
Number 1 and number 7.
Okay, Simon.
So I'm actually most confident in my pick P1. I think my champion pick is the one I'm most certain of. And probably my P2 is the one that I think is a bit Larry.
Yes. Yes, it is. Listeners, it is. Bless Simon. Good effort.
It's Joan Mir, isn't it?
That Honda's getting better, you know.
So Val, where have you placed Ferdinand? First of all, that's you.
Well, we're not doing the 2025 yet, but obviously P1 on that one, and also P2, which is not physically possible, but we'll see. I think I'm with Simon on being most confident on P1. I just think mathematically that's the one that's the highest probability, the highest percentage chance of being accurate, which doesn't even mean above 50%, but does mean probably the highest. Also maybe P4, maybe P6. I mean, as if anybody will remember what they are when we move on.
Will.
But
and I'll tell listeners.
Good
job.
I
might do.
Good job.
Yeah.
Hilarious.
So what's your hilarious punt?
P7.
Good noise.
That's okay. Yeah, we'll come to that. Right, I would say I am least confident in my number 1 pick, which perhaps bodes badly. Okay. And I had to push very hard to get one I'm 100% confident about anywhere else. Maybe number 5. Yeah, probably number 5. Anyway, we're going to go straight in with the person at the bottom of our top 10, which is still an accolade, especially if you are a rookie. Pedro Acosta has come out 10th in our joint prediction. And the thing that's a little bit uncomfortable here is that I think I'm speaking for myself and Glenn, looking at our scores. We both put Pedro Acosta in our top 10. I went 8th. Glenn went 7th. I think it's fair to say, Glenn, we've been quite influenced by paddock regular Simon Patterson's opinion and Moto2, Moto3 devotee Val Khorounzhiy's opinion how to rate Acosta. So we both put him in our top 10s. These two didn't.
Brilliant. I knew that was where you were going with that.
Oh, okay.
So I think we should start with Glenn justifying why you put Acosta as high as 7th for his rookie season on the Tech 3 Gas.
It's a slight reflection of probably two of the riders behind him in my top 10, in that I kind of wanted to make a point that I don't have that much faith in them. I have massive hopes for Acosta. The one thing that concerns me is, and I mentioned this when we did ranking the lineups for the race website, my concern is that many a promising talent has gone to a Tech 3 KTM recently and they've bombed there. I'm hoping that his talent is so good that he can kind of overpower that. 7th is maybe a little bit high. I don't think it's possible anymore for any rookie to do what Marc Marquez did more than a decade ago. MotoGP is too competitive. There's too much depth in the field. I know the front of the field was good when he blitzed everybody. I don't think you can do that anymore. So this is a vote of confidence in what Acosta's capable of, rather than kind of expressing my doubt to say, oh, well, even though he's potentially the next superstar, I think he'll only be 7th as a rookie. I think that's a reflection of where MotoGP is now. And like I say, hoping that he can overcome the potential Tech 3 problem. I do think this will be the end of Jack Miller's MotoGP career, or at least frontline MotoGP career. And I should say that that's only partly going to be down to Acosta, because the rest of it is going to be down to Jack Miller crashing too much.
I didn't have as much logic as you have for putting Acosta.
Oh, thank you. You made me look like I thought this through.
Oh, relatively. I think I came down to just a pure, there's too much excitement about this kid not to chuck him in there somewhere. And then there was a little bit of, like you, Glenn, looking at who I was putting behind him and thinking, yeah, I think they're going to struggle. But for Val and Simon, as much as you two have justifiably hyped Acosta and everything he's capable of, you don't see him getting into the top 10 in the championship this year. Simon, I want your justification on that first.
I still think he's going to have a phenomenally good season. And I think we're going to see him right at the sharp end of races that he probably has no business being at the sharp end of towards the end of the season. But I think it's completely unrealistic to expect him to be there from day one. And you forget, until I sat down and started to put together this top 10, you forget just how incredibly stacked MotoGP is right now. And Acosta, while I think he is a future multiple world champion in the Premier class, he's on arguably the third best bike on the grid right now. He's up against 8 absolutely dominant Ducatis, and like most of their riders you expect are going to be winning races this season. So it's not a reflection on him that he's not on my top 10. It's a reflection on just how stacked the rest of the grid is, that I think that he's not going to have the consistency in year one to be top 10 in the championship.
Yep, same thing for me. Absolutely 100%. And it's, I mean, you can't maybe consider him the unofficial P11, but even then, I don't know. It's, again, not a reflection on Acosta in any way, or even necessarily the KTM bike. It's just, there's 8 Dukes. They're good. They're very good bikes. They have good riders on those good bikes. And even outside of Ducati, there are riders who you just, through the experience they have, you just expect to outscore Acosta. Honestly, I'm not even sure if I definitively back Acosta to outscore Miller, and I didn't put Miller in either. So I don't, if there was a spot there for one of the two of them, that'd be one I'd be having a lot of trouble with. And honestly, maybe I would lean Miller, actually, through the experience and through last year. But thankfully, there wasn't the spot for any of them, so I don't have to make that deliberation.
I have a question for you two, then. This isn't so much about can he deliver over a season, but based on a lot of your winter rhetoric, do you expect him to win a race at some point, even if it's right near the end of the season?
Yeah.
Nah,
Yeah.
I don't think so.
So, I mean, that's a change of tune from you guys, for one thing, I'm sure. But also for me, I factored big one-off result potential into this quite a lot. And that's because I think the scoring system does reward those top-end results. If he can pinch a race win or two, the scoring system is so congested once you get past third place. It's like you gain 3 places, you've gained 3 extra points. It's not a big jump once you get below the podium positions. I think a couple of headline wins out of the blue could really make a difference for a ride like Acosta. So I guess I have got more logic than I thought. Going on to see who has ended up... Oh no, Simon, before I go to 9th, you're going to dive in.
I was just going to say, I can see those headline results coming, but I can also see them coming in sprint races where the points system makes them, doesn't make them as financially lucrative.
Yeah, that is a fair point. Also, actually, to interrupt myself again, I should add that it maybe doesn't take as much as you expect to get into the MotoGP Championship top 10 at the end of the season. I think this might be a function of that congested point system again. But last year, Fabio Quartararo was
Japanese bikes on the grid as well.
Well, yeah, Fabio Quartararo was 10th on the Yamaha that was rubbish most of the season. The year before, Miguel Oliveira was 10th on his way to being sacked by KTM. And the year before that, Maverick Viñales was 10th, despite blowing up his Yamaha and being sacked mid-season and missing a couple of rounds. So it doesn't take that much to be 10th. Speaking of Viñales, he is 9th in our combined picks. And that is by virtue of both Val and Glenn putting him 9th in their rankings, and Simon went for 10th. I didn't bother putting him in. I've come across a little bit Viñales skeptical on the podcast recently, but I'd die on that hill, frankly. As the Viñales fan club leader here, in that case, Val, as you put him joint 9th with Glenn, how do you see his season going?
So I just... Hell will freeze over before I give up on Maverick Viñales, clearly, but also I think the messaging isn't so good coming out of the preseason with the way he's gelled with the 2024 Aprilia, but it's also Maverick, and I think what we always get, is maybe a stretch of 3 or 4 races where it clicks and it looks really, really good and maybe yields like a couple of second places, maybe finally somehow will win. And then something will disappear again. There'll be another problem. He'll be knocked off his rhythm for one reason or another. Or Aprilia will enter into its usual late season period of nothing works and the bike overheats at 2 degrees Celsius or whatever. That's where I'm at. I think there will be good stretches and stretches of being not just close enough to Aleix Espargaro, but ahead for stretches that will allow him to be 9th. I don't think 9th is too bold. He was 7th last year, and it was basically that kind of season that I'm predicting him to have again. It's just that the grid around him is maybe a bit stronger now, and the preseason wasn't too encouraging. So if he stood still in terms of his Aprilia development, then 9th makes some sense to me.
Yeah, in fairness, all of us are predicting, even those who have been more positive about Viñales, are predicting he'll do worse than last year. Simon, where do you stand? Similar to Val?
Yeah, pretty much. I actually have done something a little bit strange, and he's not my second pick Aprilia rider, as we'll come
yes.
to in a minute.
Okay.
And I think that's not an unreasonable expectation this year. I think that's the other factor in this. It looks like he's not made massive progress through winter, but it looks like other people, both on Ducatis and on Aprilias, have. And I think that kind of standing still from him is just going to naturally shuffle him down the order a few places, because there's others that have done better out of winter and look better going into the season.
Matt, I know this isn't the sort of podcast you like, but I pretty much agree with what Val and Simon have said there. My summary of Viñales is probably closest to what Val said, and I think he'll just kind of be what Maverick Viñales always is, and I think that will be... I do think he'll finish the year probably surprisingly close to Aleix Espargaro on points, but he'll have gone about it in a much more boring way. There won't be the peaks and the troughs, but you'll get to the end of the year and go, oh, they're basically together again. And I think that's maybe a bigger problem for Aprilia. And I know you guys talk about the rider market all the time, so we don't need to do that today. But I do think it will raise a question about if that team needs a superstar leader. Because if they ever thought Viñales was going to be that, I don't think he is.
Well, on that topic, maybe their future superstar leader is somewhere in-house already, because I think we should address Simon's Larry Aprilia pick, because no one else has picked this guy to get in the top 10, so let's tick him off now. Simon put Ralph Fernandez 9th in his rankings, so the Trackhouse satellite rider just above Vinales. We've all had faith in Ralph Fernandez at different times, and then he's massively under-delivered. Topping the test at the end of last season, looking good in some late season races last year, not really getting away with it, he hurt himself pretty badly, coming through that big shunt in the first test and then looking good in the second test this winter. There's a bit of momentum about Fernandez at last. I don't know if, certainly for me, I'm not convinced enough that it'll carry through to put me in the championship top 10 or onto a factory Aprilia next season, but you've got a bit of faith, Simon?
Yeah, I think we're finally seeing a bit of, like you say, momentum. You know, it's worth noting that his that post-season Valencia test top in performance came like 2 days after his best ever MotoGP result of 5th. He finished last season really well. He jumped on a new bike that he is absolutely in love with at the minute. He's going to be on it all year, so he doesn't have to worry about, flubbing around with development like all the other Aprilias. And I think he's the guy that's going to deliver decent, strong performances in the first sort of third of this season that'll build up a bit of a points buffer and let him not cruise to the end of the year as the other bikes get better, because I think there's rounds later on in the year where he's going to be really, really fast. All those like Aprilia specific tracks like Silverstone. He's going to be really good. But I think, there's finally it's looking like things are starting to come together. And, speaking to Aprilia as well, there's a massive amount of faith in him within the factory. And that's not them just trying to build him up or anything. There is genuine faith that they've turned a corner with him.
How have Trackhouse staffed that team? Because I think it's so cool that they've come into MotoGP. I love NASCAR. I like what they're doing over there. They've made a splash. If they can do something similar here, that's good for MotoGP. Have they done the right thing, though, and kind of staffed the team with a bunch of people from around the paddock who know what they're doing?
They have replaced Razlan Rizali as team principal with Davide Brivio, and then everyone below that is the RNF team.
Right.
So it's a team that knows how to run Aprilias. And it's worth noting that team, even before they signed Raul Fernandez as Moto2 Championship runner-up crew chief to try and lure him in. So he's got a squad that he absolutely adores around him, who've got a year's experience with the Aprilia now. The only thing that's really changed from last year to this is that there's a few more Aprilia technicians in the garage, which isn't going to hurt anyone.
On that topic, actually, going even further back, how much continuity has what is now Trackhouse got from what was Petronas Yamaha not too long ago?
Yeah, it's basically the same team.
Yeah. So, there's an awful lot of things that are right about that team. So, if Fernandez can't show that form, then it's now or never in a way.
In fact, going even further back, there's a lot of elements of that team that are essentially the Mark VDS Honda team.
Yeah, true.
That's basically one side of the garage. The Oliveira side of the garage is essentially Mark VDS.
Moving up to our 8th place, which is late season hero Fabio Di Giannantonio, now at VR46 Ducati after a certain Marc Marquez took his Gresini place. A little bit of a split here. Val and Simon both put him 8th. Glenn put him 10th. I didn't put him in. I'm going to get my objection out of the way quickly here.
Ask yourself a question.
Okay. It's not even going to be a question. It's just going to be a statement. I need to see more. I think the snapshot remains too small. Val, tell me why I'm wrong.
I mean, I don't know that you're wrong. I wouldn't say that you're wrong, unfortunately. I wish I could say that.
Stop being nice.
Hang on, when did you guys all become best buddies? Yeah. This isn't what I signed up for, joining this podcast.
No, you know me. If I feel he's wrong, I'd say it repeatedly in a very smug tone.
Yeah,
but
true.
No, I think we still do have to see more. But I think what we have seen, it's you always try to account for the range of outcomes, right? And the ceiling is higher than 8th. The guy has looked great at the end of last season. He has looked great all through preseason. There have been a fair few riders who have suggested that out of the GB23 crop, it is Fabio Di Giannantonio who has adapted the best to the year-old Ducati and looks the best. And that's a very serious group of riders. I mean, that's Marc Marquez, that's Alex Marquez, and that's Marco Bezzecchi. And there's reason to say that out of the 4 of them, Fabio Di Giannantonio has almost maybe had the best preseason. I think that's quite considerable and important. He seems to have fit in well into the VR46 team. I think he is still probably a fragile rider in terms of race weekend performance. I think he's the kind of rider who can be easily unsettled by one crash or one qualifying session not going so well. I do think there are going to be frustrating Q1 exits for Fabio Di Giannantonio this season that remind us of the rider he was before last season's explosion of talent. But I do also think there will be really good weekends. And I think on the strength of those really good weekends, he'll get himself comfortably into the top 10. But at the same time, why I don't think you're wrong is he could easily be 11th. I think he could easily be 7th or whatever. It's going to be really close in that area. There are not going to be big points gaps, as there weren't last season. Last season, there was like that really compact bit between, was it Zarco? Yeah, it was between Zarco and Di Giannantonio. There's not that many points there. So I think anything goes in that particular area.
I think you're completely on the money, Val. I see him as having an Aleix Espargaro-esque season where he's winning races now and then you spend 4 rounds not seeing him on TV, and then suddenly he's like leading Q2 again, and everyone's like, "Oh yeah, did you? That guy." I see one of those sort of seasons for him. I think that kind of that's what we can sort of determine from what we saw last year, and I also kind of think it's enough. If he wins 3 races and finishes 11th in the championship, it's job done. That's still a really good season for him. So yeah, wouldn't be surprised to see something like that.
Yeah, ultimately, being on the grid at all this season is a relative win for Didier compared to where he was in roughly October last year. Glenn, I was going to ask you, obviously Simon and Val are in the media sessions, seeing every single lap of every race and practice session, so they could follow the Didier story developing second by second almost last season, whereas you watch every MotoGP race, but you're a little bit more detached from it in terms of day-to-day coverage. What are your perceptions of Didier? Do you still think of him as the kind of slight fluke at the end of last season, or are you starting to believe that there's actually a consistent front runner here?
No, the reason he's not higher than 10th for me, I did think he warranted getting in, but I have my doubts about how sustainable that run of late season form was from last season. So I am leaning much closer to what the guys are saying there. It sounds like nobody's expecting him to replicate the end of 2023 across a whole season, and that's my position as well. And I actually I do see I've put him 10th as a vote of confidence rather than thinking that he's not going to perform, but I do think him being 10th is a reflection of me expecting VR46 to have a tougher year this year than they had last year as well.
On to 7th place, and that goes to top Aprilia in our rankings, Aleix Espargaro. Quite a big points jump in our final score from 8th to 7th, actually. Aleix is quite close to a top 6 spot, but he ends up 7th, and that is thanks to Simon, Glenn and me just chucking him around sort of 7th, 8th-ish, and Val having the most faith and putting him 6th. So we'll go to Val first.
But I don't think that's a crazy pick or anything. You're putting me on the spot with your guys' predictions. 6th last year, while having a stupid injury in season that compromised him a bit, while having an Aprilia that, as usual, stopped working in the second half of the season. The new Aprilia looks good. It looks to suit him better. He was really impressive in the Qatar test. He was just really impressive through preseason testing, but I think particularly in the Qatar test, even, while all the eyes were on Pecco Bagnaia, I think some of the data I saw being shared around suggested that actually the best race pace belongs to Aleix Espargaro, and that it is not at all out of the realm of possibility that come the season opener next weekend, Aleix Espargaro wins. And at Aprilia, Qatar is a good track for Aprilia. There will be some other good tracks. There is a good track that it's lost in Argentina. There will also be probably some tracks where it's just a very mediocre 8th place bike. But I think that there will be enough high points, even with Aleix probably squandering an opportunity here and there. I mean, that happens. That happens to everybody, but it does happen to Aleix. I think there'll be enough high points to justify putting him that high up. And yeah, again, the grid around him may be a bit stronger, but I think the bike is an improvement. He looks like he's a bit quicker on it. And yeah, we have Marc Marquez, who's going to be in the top 6 now, but we don't have, say, Johan Zarco, probably. I don't know. So
No, we won't.
He's not in my top 6.
not in mine either. Yeah, he's number 1. But yeah, that's how I ended up with 6th again, basically.
The fundamental difference for me in Espargaro versus, say, Viñales is that I think he has moved the game on a bit over winter, and he looks like he's got a bike that's working a bit better specifically for him, in that it's a bit more aggressive, and that kind of suits what he needs, even if it's a bit tougher to ride. He has started every season that I remember at Aprilia saying, "This is the best I've ever been. This is the best I've ever ridden." And it's kind of hard to argue with him because that is the trend, that he's getting better with age. It's definitely a pro cyclist thing. It's his wannabe pro cyclist thing, because they all do it too. But he is making the steps to kind of maintain his position, and that will come with a couple of wins, especially in Qatar, where I think he's got a really good chance, unless they screw up qualifying like they're very, very prone to doing. He's got a good chance of starting the season on a good, strong note, and probably even being like a kind of scrappy underdog title contender for the first half of the year, up until we get to like Red Bull Ring and it starts to fade away, and then we go overseas and the whole thing collapses, as is tradition at Aprilia. But yeah, I think it's not surprising that we've all kind of landed with him in the same position, roughly, for me, because I think that's pretty much, he'll end up in that ballpark once everything stops moving at the end of the year.
Yeah, I think I would sum all of that up as he'll do what he always does. There'll be great weekends where he'll claim the spoils that he deserves, the way he's led this team for a long time. And as Simon says, he keeps working on himself. He keeps making himself better. That's great. He deserves all of that. But ultimately, like it is every season, it won't quite be enough. So even if he does drag himself into fringe title contention like we've seen before, it will fall away like it always does. I have a slightly longer term worry for Aprilia that we are either in the middle of or reaching the end of kind of their sweet spot to really make the most of, the Japanese manufacturers getting it wrong and that sort of thing. I worry that they've missed their window because they've not been able to plug anyone perhaps more consistent with an even higher ceiling than Aleix onto that bike. Maybe that will change in the future. But yeah, he's going to have his high points. And if those come in the first half of the season, or even, in a few days' time in Qatar, then great.
Yeah, like I said on the 2025 predictions last week, where I binned him off the grid in a very honourable, respectful way, because I'd just love to see him go out on a high. I think he will go on that high if this is his final year. Definitely some race wins in him, but like you'll say, there's not a season-long race win threat at every round here. Also, really good point about the Aprilia sweet spot, Glenn. I think the way the concessions rules have fallen, that sweet spot is going to disappear really quickly now. I think Honda and Yamaha have got too many tools in their armory to catch up quickly now, and I'm sad for Aprilia on that front, because actually I love the story of this team.
You know we love talking stats here at The Athletic. Here's one that's super simple to remember. Discover automatically doubles the cash back you've earned on your credit card at the end of your first year with Cashback Match. That means with Discover, you could turn $150 cash back to $300. That's right, you could put it towards some memorabilia you've had your eye on, or treat yourself to a premium sports network. You earn and Discover doubles. See terms at discover.com/creditcard.
We'll get back to the pod in a moment, but first of all, let me tell you about Grammarly. Email, Google Docs, Slack, you write across multiple platforms and places during your workday, so delivering consistent, high-quality communication everywhere is key. Grammarly is an AI writing partner that helps you get work done faster with high-quality writing for better projects, proposals, presentations, and more. Best of all, Grammarly works where you work, so you can get more done no matter what tools you use. As a journalist and podcast host, I'm constantly writing and rewriting copy and drawing up scripts. It's part of the job, and Grammarly helps make it faster. It's got some really cool features like tone suggestions to help you strike the right balance between direct and friendly in work emails. Plus, Grammarly has a ton of other great features like advanced spelling, grammar, punctuation, and conciseness suggestions to ensure your writing is professional, mistake-free, and clear. Get AI writing support that works where you work. Sign up and download for free at grammarly.com/podcast. That's GRAMMARLY.com/podcast. Easier said, done.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
Sixth in our predicted top 10 is a bit of a come down for one of last year's title contenders. That's where we expect Marco Bezzecchi to end up. He was third last year, managed to sustain a title fight almost to the end on a year-old Ducati. He stuck with a year-old Ducati, well, 2023, not 2022, but still the older spec, and stayed with VR46 even though Ducati didn't really want him to and were offering him the latest spec bike at Pramac. So we're not expecting as much from VR46 collectively, it seems. So all of us, there's not even much distinction here. All of us have put him between 5th and 7th in our ranking, with Val the biggest relative skeptic at 7th and Simon the most optimistic in 5th place. I'm going to go on that grounds. I'm going to go to Val first to give your take on why you think this is not going to be as fruitful a year for Bez. 7th is a big drop from 3rd, actually. Actually, when I look at those numbers next to each other, that's like your season's going to be worse.
Yeah, it is, and maybe a bit much, but he hasn't had the best of first touches with the 2023 Ducati, and the 2023 Ducati is not as good as the 2024 Ducati, and is less good compared to the current spec bike than what Bezzecchi had previously, what he had last year. Some of the weekends Marco Bezzecchi had in 2023 were, I don't want to say inspiring sounds weird, but spectacular, phenomenal, and I think maybe that'll happen again this season, but I think the baseline will be lowered, and that's what is reflected in me placing him 7th. Still think ahead of Di Giannantonio, because as good as Di Giannantonio's recent run was, on the strength of all the evidence in MotoGP, I have to place Bez higher still until Di Giannantonio gives me at least a year to see it in a different way. And it's far from giving up on Bezzecchi at this. He is an exceptionally talented rider, but I think this year's circumstances maybe not ideal for him.
So I put him 6th, and it's, as Val says, not reflection of his talent. I don't think last year was a fluke or anything like that. I do just think he's going to regret not taking the chance to get on a current spec Ducati, and I didn't like that decision at the time, and I fear that has he chosen comfort over ambition and the opportunity for career progression there. Maybe he's got a longer term plan that's better than an intermediate step at Pramac. And also maybe he just thought, well, actually, the year-old Ducati is normally pretty close for the bulk of the season, and he's just been caught out by the fact that Ducati seemed to take a bigger step this year with the 24 bike.
I don't want to read 4D chess into it when it might have easily been, a emotional decision or a decision of comfort within the VR46 ranks, and that will have certainly been part of it. But at the same time, and we've spoken about this a lot, what you would often expect is the hand-me-down bike to be strongest in the early rounds, which is when all the contracts are signed. So, for instance, if he shot out of the blocks and won 2 of the first 4 races, then, every factory in MotoGP is, ringing up his email, which is not a thing people do. So I don't know why I just used that phrase, but it is in his email, is on his phone. He's going to be, having offers left, right, and center. And the end goal wasn't to end up at Pramac for any prolonged period of time. And I think a switch to Pramac could have potentially then created a situation where he's at Pramac also for 25 and 26. Whereas here, I think he's left his options more open, I think. But
that backfires if the 23 bike isn't good enough and he can't make that splash at the start of the year.
And I think it may have backfired. I mean, let's wait and see, but I think that may have been how it worked out.
That's my guess with this. I think it's very 2D chess. I think he's backed himself to go, I'm so comfortable in this team, the relationship's working, the older spec bike is usually an advantage for enough of the season. I can make this work. I don't think it's lacking ambition as such. It's the opposite. He's had too much faith in what he can do in the environment he's in, and I think he's going to turn out to have guessed wrong. Also, Val, if you're going to ring up an email, that's not too different to sending a WhatsApp voice note, is it?
Yes.
We should have like talking emails now. Simon.
I'm not as harsh on Bezzecchi as maybe the rest of you are. And I don't think he's going to have a terrible season. I don't think he's necessarily made a bad choice at all, sticking with what he knows. And I don't think the 23 bike's going to be a huge hindrance. I actually see him having a really similar season to the one that he had in 2023, where he has some amazing weekends and then he has some weekends where he kind of disappears. But the difference this year, and the reason that I have him lower in my championship standings than last year, is because I think the weekends where he's further down the grid, he's going to get punished harder. There's going to be more people who are going to be in front of him because, while, yeah, we don't have, say, Zarco, I think his teammate is going to be more consistently in front of him than Luca Marini was. I think that Marc Marquez is obviously going to be a factor in this. And I think that, there's another Ducati rider who is still unnamed, who was my Larry prediction, who I think is going to be taking points off pretty much everyone through this year. On the sort of the sum of that, I think Bez has put himself in a decent position, because it would have been very easy to get trapped into a Pramac long-term arrangement, especially if Ducati had tried to push for a 2-year contract with that promotion. I think the position he's in right now, he can start the season well. He can deliver a few good performances at the start of the year, and then he can sign for Aprilia, like I said last week he was going to.
As part of the Aprilia super team, which we will give a nod to again later. Just such a good prediction. You say we're being harsh on Bez. In my defence there, even though I don't think his decision will turn out to be the right one, I've put him as high as 6th, because I actually just really, really, really rate him. I can see the package he's on not being 6th place worthy this year if enough other manufacturers are improving. But last year was phenomenal. Every time we kind of planned out a podcast episode going, let's not talk about Bez's title hopes because, okay, he's still there in the points, but he's not going to be next week. There he was again. He kept on proving us wrong. And weekends like, it was India, wasn't it, where he came from behind in the sprint with that incredible race pace and demolished everyone in the Grand Prix. Just phenomenal. And he's still there at that point on a bike surely well out-developed by that time, putting in performances like that. And he only really tails off and goes invisible when he hurts himself and has those slightly injury compromised rounds. So I've got huge faith in Bez still. I just think, for me, huge faith in Bez translates to 6th on the year-old bike this year.
I mean, there's a reason why people like Casey Stoner are saying that he's one of the most talented riders in this grid.
Yeah.
And I know that's because Casey's his natural talent, able to ride without the electronics. That's going to be something that's going to come into play probably going into the new rule set, and that's going to make him a really interesting, factories are going to want to get him on board because of that, if they've seen the data, if they've seen what Casey sees, because it's more likely than not that we're going to see the bike dialed back a little bit electronically. So there is a lot of reasons, I think, to be optimistic about his future regardless of this season. But I think that he'll still, there'll be a few good results in the start of the season. There'll be the usual peaks and troughs, but the troughs will be a little bit deeper.
Let's count down as we head into our top 5 then. In 10th, we have Pedro Acosta. 9th, Maverick Vinales. 8th, Fabio Di Gianantonio. 7th, Aleix Espargaro. 6th, Marco Bezzecchi. And in 5th place, we've gone for Brad Binder. So the big Binder fans here were Val, obviously, and Glenn, who both put him 4th. Simon went for 6th, and I went for 5th, which is my prediction I was most confident in, because it just seems like the most Binder thing that could possibly happen. Still a few Ducatis to go, but there's a KTM up in 5th place in our ranking. So let's go with Glenn first on Binder. Why are you thinking as high as 4th in a field of 8 very fast Ducatis?
Because I believe everything Val tells me. Val says it happens to me. No, did I? I've already forgotten, Matt. Did I say 4th place was the one I was most confident in at the beginning? I think I did.
I think you did. Yeah. I think when we were all doing our most confident predictions, there was a massive landing on Binder from most of us for that one.
Yeah. So I think he's going to do what we're becoming accustomed to now. I think he will sort of consistency his way to being the best non-Ducati, wherever that is. And in my list, it's fifth. But I think what is not in doubt is that Binder will be the best non-Ducati. Who knows? Is that going to be second or third? Is it going to be ninth? But what I want to see that bundled in with winning. Binder and KTM as a package need to win, and not just nick one somewhere. They've got to start winning. Winning's got to become a habit for this combination. I know that's harder than it's possibly been in a generation in MotoGP at the moment because of the Ducati, this kind of freak Ducati situation we have. But KTM should be the best bike, I think, that isn't a Ducati on the grid, and I think Binder should do the best job with it. So I can see some fluctuation in where he ends up, but I'm totally certain he'll be the best non-Ducati on the grid by the end of the year.
My fundamental sort of what I see is the fundamental weak link in Brad's performances lately is that he's not winning races. And
it's that killer instinct
in a grid where Fabio Di Giannantonio was winning races, for Brad Binder to have gone 2.5 years without a race win is just, it's a little bit embarrassing actually. Like that's a long gap for a guy who is on a factory bike with the longest contract in MotoGP and more resources pointed his way than anyone else in this grid. It's not great. And it's, there's been a lot of hype around Brad and there's been a lot of confidence in his abilities, but he really needs to start delivering a win or two to back that up. And there is one thing to be said for consistencying your way to a decent championship position, which is what he has done over the last few years. But also, it's worth noting that championship position should have been probably a place higher in 2023 if it wasn't for all the really, really dumb mistakes he made on the last lap of races with track limits. Like he needs to, there's work to be done, and not just on the bike, which is improving it on the, sort of constant trajectory that KTM's improve on whenever KTM and Red Bull throw buckets of cash at any project. I think that there's work to be done on Brad Binder as well, and we need to see some of that this season to show that he can be higher in the championship.
All right, I think wins are overrated. So let's.
When's the sole reason we're here?
Here's what I mean by that. Not in terms of the emotion or the importance or the value. I think wins are overrated in certain situations when it comes to projecting a rider on a bike that isn't a consistent win threat. And it's, I'm going to do the favorite MotoGP podcast thing of referencing Formula One, but for me, it's the Nico Hülkenberg podium situation. Nico Hülkenberg has never been consistently in a podium car, so the fact that he doesn't have podiums is of limited statistical value. And for me, the same is true for Brad Binder. Yes, the KTM bike has been winning, but I think it is unfair to penalize riders too much for not capitalizing on opportunities that are too rare to make a full projection on. For me, that is the case for Binder, even though he's flubbed good win opportunities. He also did win 2 sprints last year, which I think is important. But it's more, for me, more important is what he does over a season and whether you would really expect him to go winless. For instance, he was in a factory Ducati. You wouldn't. You'd expect him to win 6 or 7 probably. Why I think he will be 4th is, I don't know, I might be stupid because I included him in 4th and I then didn't include any of the other KTM riders, which might be a mistake. I don't think there's that big a gulf in that camp, especially with the arrival of Pedro Acosta. But Binder brings home the points and he delivers the results, and even the mistakes he makes aren't huge mistakes. Like the Binder mistakes we think back to last year are the track limit stuff, which is like 1 position each. Honestly, I don't care. Doesn't matter to me at all. Doesn't move the needle for me at all. And the Valentin mistake, which was a really bad one, but instead of, it still wasn't 25 points to 0, it was 25 points to 16. Because he still recovered to 3rd place, because that is what Brad Binder does. I slightly resent, and I know we joke a lot, and it's fair, and you guys should absolutely continue piling in on me. But I slightly resent the idea of being a Binder fan, because it makes it feel like what I'm saying isn't ground in total 100% pure, uncut rationale, and it is. The guy brings home the points. That's honestly, that has always been the full entirety of my argument. I guess maybe I am higher on him than most as a performer, but it's not a question of fandom at all. It's just a question of what you value in terms of what a rider delivers. And I guess at a certain point, I used to underrate Brad Binder quite a bit, and then I just looked at the points he brings in, and something broke in my brain, and made me more rational, I feel, as a MotoGP evaluator. I don't know. This was a very long speech without really a great point to it, but yeah.
I think the summary was that wins don't matter, wasn't it?
Yes,
that was at the start and near the end.
It was wins don't matter and keep abusing Val was what I took away from that.
However, I largely agree with you on quite a lot of that. One thing I don't agree with you on is the Nico Hülkenberg comparison, because for an F1 tangent, I think that does a massive disservice to Binder, because a lot of Hülkenberg's lack of podiums is his own fault. I don't think Binder's lack of wins particularly is. I am actually with you on a lot of this, Val. Binder gets credit from me for being the person in among a group of Ducatis in a race where no one else is. Time and time and time again. Okay, 2022 and maybe early 2023 because of the Alex Rins win on the Honda. When you were getting a lot of anomalous wins, the fact that Binder wasn't nicking more anomalous wins did reflect badly on him. But once you get past the Rins point, look at last season. Get rid of sprints. Just look at the Grand Prix. It's a ton of Ducati wins and a couple of Aprilia wins on really Aprilia-friendly tracks. And other than that, it's wall-to-wall Ducati. No one else is winning in that situation. But Binder is more often than not the person who's chucking a move on the Ducati, making something happen somehow. And I really, really admire that. Top 6 in the championship for each of the last 3 years on a KTM, in among all those Ducatis, in years where Yamaha was quite good at one point as well, in years when Suzuki was still about. He's done so much that's so impressive. And yeah, getting track limits on the last lap as many times as he did, that's the key thing. Doing it and then doing it again next day in one case. That's not smart. Tidy that up. But there's so much to admire, and that's why I can't see him being outside the top 5 in the championship, even on a grid with 8 Ducatis and Aprilia looking so good.
I'm just going to throw out one quick point just to kind of reinforce everything I've said and to get Glenn on side with me by pointing out that Brad Binder got beaten by Dani Pedrosa at Misano last year.
We haven't got to Dani Pedrosa in my top 10
That justifies my position.
That's a good point. I got nothing on that. That's the one that I don't really have anything on. So wins don't matter, but being beaten by Dani Pedrosa does.
Yeah, okay, you can have that. Let's go on to the rider in 4th place, which is Simon's hilarious prediction. And last year, this rider was in, let's just see, because I can't remember off the top of my head because it was a long way down.
47th.
15th. Enea Bastianini. Simon expects his resurgence to take him all the way to 2nd in the World Championship.
Oh, nice.
Now, the rest of us will expect a lot better from Bastianini this year than last year, hoping, obviously, for an injury-free one. I put him 4th. Val and Glenn both went 5th, but we have to open with Simon on this. The Beast in 2nd place.
I genuinely think if we were, I can't remember yesterday, so I can't remember this podcast last year. But
I don't think we did it last year in this form.
If I'd said Bastianini 2nd at this point last year, I think it wouldn't have been a Larry prediction. It would have been maybe a bit of an outlier, but it wouldn't have been too Larry.
Agreed.
And what we've seen in the 12 months since is his bookies odds dipped dramatically because he had an absolutely terrible season, which was kind of largely through no fault of his own. I mean, the big factor that messed it up was Luca Marini at the beginning of the year, and everything that came after that. He still, despite that terrible season, won a race in really spectacular form. He, used the year to rebuild himself really well. Normally, when we see riders go through a process like that, they end up stronger at the end of it. It makes them a better rider all round. And he's jumping on a 2024 Ducati that looks to be just phenomenally good. And I think all those things considered, I don't think he's got the beating of Pecco Bagnaia, but I do believe that he has the beating of, say, Jorge Martin, because satellite teams can't win championships, and and he is the factory rider. Last year was the outlier regarding his form versus Martin's, and I don't think this year will be the outlier.
I would love Simon to be right about this, because I did really rate Bastianini through the Gresini stint and was expecting him to beat Bagnaia to last year's title. In fairness, I thought he would really shake things up in the factory team. That's why I'm giving him that big leap up to 4th in my ranking, but I can't go fully with Simon's argument without more evidence. Val, where do you see it?
Yeah, I mean, it feels like I'm going to do the same bit from this podcast as I have done on a couple of episodes already. So listeners, fast forward like 15 minutes or whatever.
Does it end with you going, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it repeatedly?
It does not end. It ends with me saying, and it begins with me saying, and ends with me saying that the format's not good for him. And I still believe that, and I will continue to believe that the format's bad for him, that there will be too many sprint races that Jorge Martin wins and Enea Bastianini finishes in 6th or 7th, and that the Sunday races, even though they are more valuable, will not quite negate that. And also that by losing the extra time to work and prioritize his qualifying pace, because you have to qualify right away now. So there will be qualifyings that just go wrong for him immediately. He will be out in Q1 a bunch of times, I suspect, I fear. Otherwise, great rider. I think still on Sunday, a very, very good performer. Even last year, if you look a bit closer, I think there were glimpses of that. And of course, 2022 is just magic every single time. That's, again, I said it begins and ends with the same thing. I don't like the format for him. And I think it places an artificial ceiling on how well he can do while he is still this version of Enea Bastianini. But again, maybe that will change in season. I struggle to account for that sometimes, and I struggle to accept it. But people change, and riders change, and their strong suits change. Again, Johan Zarco used to be qualifier extraordinaire, right? Used to be an absolutely really wonderful qualifier in his time at Tech 3 Yamaha. Last year, he was the best racer on the grid and an absolutely appalling qualifier. So I have to keep an open mind to the same sort of possibility of an Enea Bastianini transformation, hopefully without the downside of the other part getting worse. Ideally, he'll just get better at the qualifying bits and the adaptation bits, but keeps his late race pace magic.
A lot of Zarco talk on this show, isn't there?
Just you wait till the top 3.
Yeah. I love Simon's pick for putting Bastianini 2nd, partly because I was worried that I was being too generous putting him 5th, and that is because I have a fondness for him, really, because of what he did in 2022, and I want to see some of that come back. Obviously, last year was so bad for various reasons that I have a slight doubt that he can immediately rediscover what he had in 2022. He has to discover it. He's got to, you've got to make, when you've got a bike that's going to be this good, you've got to make use of it. And I do feel that we can look at last year and go, yes, he won a race, but that was a massive outlier. And I just wish it hadn't been. So if he's in the top 5, as I've put him, great. If he's right up there, like Simon has suggested, amazing. I want Simon's prediction to be true more than my own. And I hope if it is that, I want it to be a real title challenge, not, oh, he's just finished 2nd to the other guy who's also got the best bike.
This is a complete tangent, but I want to throw it out here because something happened this week that made my point perfectly for me of why satellite teams can't win championships. And it's because Ducati did their team launch by taking over an entire ski resort for 4 days and paying for 100 journalists to attend in an all expenses paid trip and, give us ski races and press conferences and et cetera, et cetera. And Pramac took their riders to the F1 grid with a camera operator who didn't show us the bike, a press officer who forgot to invite most of the journalists to the debriefs, a rider who turned up late, and a presenter who no one told was supposed to call the star rider Jorge Martin and not Jorge Martin. And that's the difference in satellite teams and factory teams. And that is why I still don't think Pramac are going to be able to put together a real season. And the Bastianini has a huge advantage being in factory colours.
Well, in a second, we will see where Jorge Martin appears in our ranking. I'll do the countdown up to 4th place before we get into our top 3. So 10th, Pedro Acosta. 9th, Maverick Vinales. 8th, Fabio Di Antonio. 7th, Aleix Espargaro. 6th, Marco Bezzecchi. 5th, Brad Binder. 4th, Enea Bastianini. You can probably guess the top 3, but not the order perhaps from here, listeners. But I do want to quickly look at some people who missed out very quickly. Just one specific group. Anybody on a Japanese bike. No one from Honda or Yamaha got into our top 10. There were a few votes, though. And the reason this is significant is because, as far as I can see, this has never happened in an actual top 10 championship. There's always been at least one rider from a Japanese manufacturer in there. But last year, only just with Quartararo in 10th for Yamaha and another 7th place for Miller somewhere along the way, and that would not have been the case. So the only people who put Japanese manufacturer riders in the top 10 were Val, who put Quartararo 10th. I put both Yamahas in, Quartararo 9th and Alex Rins 10th. Simon, your hand went straight up as soon as we got onto this topic, so I think it's your turn to tell me why I'm wrong.
I think that with the concessions, with the amount of testing they have planned, with the amount of development they can do this year, the Japanese factories have to go into this season having already written it off in terms of results. I think this has to be a pure season to make the bikes better and then focus on what you're going to do in 2025, both just to improve and to make the most of those concessions while they have them and to keep some of the talent that they have signed up. I think that they have to be just not really worried about records and how long it's been since Honda have won a race and how there's never been a Japanese bike in the top 10 and all of that. They need to go in fresh-minded, written off any result, anything that comes as a bonus, and focus on it that way.
I'm going to defend my pick slightly using the same logic that you threw in there, actually, Simon. It's the concessions. It's the amount that they can do during the season. Now, okay, they might not be bringing all that to the track for race trims straight away, but there's so much scope for those two manufacturers to make progress. And like my point earlier about how congested the points get when you get a bit further back, Quartararo still pulled off 3 podium finishes last year. It doesn't take many podium finishes and some of those big kind of top-end point scores, seconds and thirds, to start shooting yourself upwards when the field's so congested. I just think Quartararo and Rins on an improving Yamaha are too good relative to some of the people who will be on probably better bikes but don't have that top-end talent to really make the most of the chances that come their way. Val, you must have a slight bit of agreement with me there because you sneaked Quartararo into your top 10 as well.
I guess, but I don't feel good about it anymore. I don't know. I look at it now, and you've got me to look at the 2023 standings, and I've realized that basically if Jack Miller finishes the Valencia race where he should have finished it, then Quartararo is well out of the top 10. And
so my argument basically made you agree with me less, is what you're saying here.
Potentially, yeah, because I don't think individual podiums will get it done, especially if Quartararo is riding a little bit frustrated. And for all the podiums, there's also just a couple of races when he just chucks it down the road because points don't really matter. If he races it like Marc Marquez raced last year, it's either you get a good result or it's in the gravel. And Quartararo did crash a lot more than he used to last year. Like the worse Yamaha has got in terms of competitiveness, although he would also argue handling, but certainly competitiveness. The worse it got, the more he's been crashing out of races and making mistakes. And it probably reflects a priority, but also maybe a mindset sort of situation. So I don't feel that good about any of them being in the top 10. But on the other hand, yeah, concessions. Yeah, I'm probably okay with keeping him in there. Maybe they'll improve the bike so much that there's going to be a step forward that we can't even imagine right now in the second half of the season. Like everybody on the Yamaha is going to be Fabio Di Antonio, and also everybody on a Honda are going to be locking out the top sixes in every race. Doubtful, but yeah, maybe a top 10 inclusion is the right level of hedging your bets on that kind of thing.
I just think Val has set a dangerous precedent by presuming that Jack Miller can be relied upon to finish in any position.
To avoid us dwelling on that point, I think Quartararo Rins is a brilliant lineup, and it's way beyond the level of the bike they're going to be riding. Honestly, I didn't have any Japanese manufacturer riders in my top 10. I don't feel bad about that at all. They weren't really close, and I think Quartararo in particular is a superstar who should be fighting for championships every season. I felt worse about leaving Alex Marquez out of my top 10 than any of the Yamaha or Honda riders.
I'm kind of there, yeah.
Yeah, I get that.
It is amazing that collectively us and a few of our colleagues ranked the Yamaha pair the best lineup on the grid when we're doing 2024 lineups ranked, and we collectively don't see them getting in the top 10 in the championship this season. Right, we're into the top 3. There are 3 conspicuous riders left. 2 title contenders from last year and someone who's won a lot of championships. Let's see which order they land in for us. In 3rd place is Jorge Martin.
Johan Zarco.
No, his old teammate. So Jorge Martin, in the words of the Pramac presenter from last week, but Jorge Martin. So, in reverse order, Simon has least faith in where Martin is going to end up this year. He put him 4th. Val and Glenn both went 3rd. I was full Martin fan club and predicted 2nd for him again in this year's World Championship. Simon's going to talk about satellite team something. So I'm going to go to Val to open this one instead. How do you see Martin's season panning out?
First, I've got a bone to pick with Simon, who, when the Jorge Martin thing happened during the presentation, went to Twitter to post a gif of George R.R. Martin from Game of Thrones, when clearly the correct association is George Martin, the Beatles producer from the 60s.
Producer.
Yeah, so I'm not very impressed with that.
One of them is more visibly recognizable. Plus, I don't think there's many gifs of George Martin, the Beatles producer.
Good point. To be fair,
Not that would resonate in 2024 particularly.
No, exactly.
I think Jorge Martin, or maybe we should just call him Jorge Martin from now on, but I think Jorge Martin...
Oh, please do.
I think Jorge Martin can win the championship.
George Martin is just not a fast name, is it? It's not.
Isn't it?
No, literally isn't.
You haven't listened to those Beatles songs.
Well, but that was the thing with Jorge Lorenzo, wasn't it? George Lawrence.
This is a train wreck. I've ruined this by bringing this up. I think he can win the championship. I think that's an entirely possible outcome. I don't feel particularly good about putting him in P3. I've not really seen anything in the preseason to suggest he'll be worse than he was last season. I think he was awesome last season. I think he was super fast. I almost want to go retroactively put him in 2nd at least. I don't know what I was doing. I hate my top 10. He's super fast. I think we still haven't reckoned completely with how fast he was, with how fast a rider needs to be to win all of those sprint races that he won at the end of last year, how fast he has been since basically day 1 in MotoGP. He has bad days. He has decisions that I don't entirely understand. He has crashes that really shouldn't be there. But I think there has been an increasingly linear progression to Jorge Martin. And I think whatever factory gets him for 25 has done amazing. And honestly, he can win this year's championship. I absolutely 100% believe that. And if he hits the track with the same sort of sprint form that he ended 2023 on, why did I put him 3rd? What was I doing? What was wrong with me?
Well, I think we'll come to that with who you put above him. I think that'll make you have faith in your own decisions. Do you feel as tormented by putting him 3rd as Val now does, Glenn?
Absolutely not. No.
Good.
I kind of hope I'm wrong, but I think last year was his on a Pramac shot. I think that the stars aligned as best as they ever will, and as I said at the end of last year, I think he and the team conspired to throw it away. I think it's annoying because I want Simon's satellite thing to be proven wrong, and last year was the chance. The satellite probably should have won the title last year, and I know Simon would have then gone, oh no, the satellite didn't win it, the factory lost it, and I'd say no, the satellite won it, because in the end, the satellite team and its rider did lose it, which means it was theirs to lose. But anyway, that's a side argument. I think he'll have a really good season. I think he'll definitely be in the top 3, and in a less self-torturing way of kind of picking up what Val said, he could be 1st, 2nd or 3rd. That's just fine. I'm not tied at as many knots over it though as Val is. I just think we're now at the point where Jorge Martin is a top MotoGP rider, but I think his chance to get a championship in this situation was last year, because looking at the 2 riders who obviously are above him in our combined top 10, either Bagnaia is not going to leave the door open in the way that he did, or maybe his Barcelona crash did last year, and will just now be a relentless best bike championship winning machine for the at least short-term future, or Marc Marquez is going to do absolute crazy things now he's back on a remotely good bike. So I just think the chances, it's one of those two, as we'll come to in a moment. At least one of them is going to do a better job than him, and he'll be good, he'll win races, he'll win lots of sprints. It's not going to be enough. I think his title shot with Pramac has gone.
Simon, I suggested you'd just bang on about satellite teams not winning titles, but he's not actually your top satellite pick either. So what is your stance on Martin's 2024 season at the moment?
I want to see a bit more growth from him as a rider. I still think he's not the finished package. He's still a bit rough and ready. He's still a bit prone to doing dumb stuff like wiping out Marc Marquez whenever, he really shouldn't be. He'll
have more chances to do that this year.
He will. He'll have many more chances to do that this year, which is fantastic. And to be fair, it was only revenge for Marc Marquez getting him at round one. But, there's just, I don't know, we every time I see him, every time I work with him, there's a chip in his shoulder that I think that he needs to lose before he's the full package. And it's always going to work against him. It's always going to be a hindrance to him until he gets rid of that, and until he kind of almost needs to establish himself as his own man, rather than always trying to be the underdog whenever he's a genuine title contender. He seems to think that the world's against him when it's not, and all of that, I think, affects his attitude on the bike and the way that he approaches races, and the way that he tends to be a bit bullheaded and things like that. I pulled out the Marc Marquez thing at Valencia as one example, but the most egregious mistake he made last year was the Phillip Island tire choice. And that was entirely him telling his team that he knew better and going with a tire choice that everyone questioned before the race and everyone laughed at him after the race for, because he threw away a perfectly good win.
It was dumb.
It was really dumb. And that's kind of my point. He tends to still do dumb things. And I need to see him get rid of that before I see him as a genuine title contender, rather than someone that I think got not lucky, but fortunate in 2023, because there was riders who weren't at the sharp end, like Enea Bastianini, who I think made him look better in comparison, especially whenever Pecco, who is also not perfect, but is getting better at it, did a few stupid things of his own.
This is the progression thing for me that gives me more faith. I think Jorge Martin of 2023 was a much more reliable proposition than the Jorge Martin of 2022, when we only really talked about him when he'd thrown his bike down the road while leading by a couple of seconds. Now, like you say, there are more rough edges. There were things that were daft at the end of last season, but the good bits were so good. So another year of progression, the experience of being in a title fight, still being on the best bike on the grid, all those things to me add up to such a fast package still. I so nearly put him first. I so nearly had faith in him to get it over the line this time. The thing that made me hold back a bit was that attitude and focus point. I think that's a good way of summarising what you're talking about there, Simon, that how other things can affect the decisions he makes in race, before a race, that sort of thing. I can't see that getting any better in a year where he's trying to decide what his future is and trying to fight for a factory seat and determined to get him for 2025. I think that's for someone who is quite emotional in how they go about getting their best performance, I think that's quite a big disrupting factor, and that's why that's why I couldn't quite put him first, but I certainly expect him to be a really entertaining title contender again this season.
For what it's worth, I think the main thing that Jorge Martin believes he learned from fighting for the title is that Ducati hate him in favour of the factory team. that is genuinely, he came away with a chip on his shoulder about the way that he perceived they treated Pecco, and that's not going to be helpful going into another season on a bike that it sounds like suits Bagnaia and Bastianini's riding style a little bit better. And, where he's going to have to decide what his future is. And if Bastianini wins a couple of races early on in the season and looks like a surefire pick for the number 2 spot to keep his seat, that's just going to muddy the waters even further for Martin.
Top 2 time then, and in second place in our championship prediction, Marc Marquez. 3 of us Didn't quite see him being champion now. Simon and me both went for third. Val went for second. Glenn, your prediction you were least confident in, but you expect Marc Marquez to return to being world champion this season on his first and potentially only Gresini Ducati season.
Expect might be the wrong word, especially as
you put him first.
Yeah, you're able to preface it with the fact that it's the one I'm least confident about. Right, here we go. I am aware that he is playing his chances down. I'm aware, especially from the excellent interview Simon did with him, he's talking about top fives, not necessarily race wins and championships. I believe him that his main motivation for this year is finding out if he's the rider he was pre-surgeries. And I believe him when he says you have to take seriously the amount of work and suffering that has gone on there. And, you know, is he, regardless of what he is in the head and whether he's the same rider, physically, is the body still capable of it? I semi-believe him that it's not about championships. It's about just feeling like a competitive MotoGP rider again. And I accept that the bike deficit, as we talked about with the VR46 guys, the bike deficit is maybe a little bit bigger than it has been the last couple of years if you're on a year-old Ducati. However, the moment there was the first rumour that he might end up on a Gresini Ducati, I told myself if he got it, he would win the championship. And I am ignoring all evidence to the contrary, all the stuff I've just laid out. He's going to do it. He's still a freak of nature. He's still so much better than... well, so much might be unfair, but I think he is still the best rider on the grid. So I made that list. I made that list of points against putting him number one, but I still had to. Matt, if you were on my podcast where we talk about old F1 stuff, you would declare this was a pick based on vibes.
Yes,
and
and rightly so.
I think it's me. I'm willing it because a bit like Bastianini being right up there when we talked about him and Simon having him second. I want it to happen. I want this to be the storyline, the narrative arc for Marc Marquez, that you put him on not the best bike, but you put him on a decent bike again. You get him on a Ducati that we probably never thought we'd ever see him on a Ducati, even if it's not a factory one, and he's just going to go absolutely ballistic. If this happens, it won't be dominant. It won't be a dominant championship win. It's not going to be like some of the Honda titles because that's just not possible with what he'll be up against. But I really, really hope he's at least in the mix in this championship, right down as close to the wire as we can get.
You know what? I like that. And I think that's genuinely a good argument, even if it is vibes-based.
Val's changed his mind again.
A little bit, but...
He hates his top 10 even more now.
Here's the Marc Marquez thing for me, right? The bulk of all the arguments against him being in the title contention, all of those arguments are based on two tracks. They're based on Sepang and they're based on Qatar. And he does not like Sepang and he does not like Qatar. We have not seen Marc Marquez on, in proper 2024 conditions at a track that doesn't even like, not even like Kota, not even like Sachsenring, but just a more normal track where there's more of a track record of success for Marc. Marc's had some success at Sepang and at Qatar, but relative to other tracks, they are pretty obvious outliers. And the pace he's run there, if we assume in-season progression, and if we assume that those tracks are naturally punishing him, which is an assumption because you don't know if that translates across Honda and Ducati, but if we make that assumption, then there's every reason to think that he will be a consistent frontrunner and potentially in title contention. So actually I am happy with picking him second, I guess. Oh man, this has not been good for my credibility or for my stability as a human being in terms of the takes that I deliver. But this is a guy who, at Honda, before the switch, has basically humiliated every other rider who dared show up in that camp. Apart from one, I think Alex Rins is the only one who has escaped the Marc Marquez destruction, even post-injury. And Paul Espargaro showed up there. There was one weekend in which Paul Espargaro was better, one Qatar weekend, and the rest of the season, Marc was wiping the floor with him. Joan Mir, fantastic rider, got beaten to hell every weekend, not just by the bike, but by the fact that Marc could just, at will, run a second faster. we still, I think, we overrate him, but we still underrate him, I think. This is a very fascinating situation to be in. I think you can absolutely make an argument that he will be champion without it being totally vibes-based.
Really? All I will quickly add is, we've heard, as he so eloquently put it to Simon, the reasons why he's playing his chances down. If you were Marc Marquez, that's exactly what you'd do in this situation. I know you guys debated, which way do he loves mind games. Which way should he go? Should he be talking himself up to get inside everyone's head, or should he be talking himself down? His personal, private ambitions will be higher than what he's saying in public.
Yeah, surely. Simon, I'm really interested in how your take in this has changed, which I don't think is an inconsistency. I think you are reacting to the evidence through testing. But when this deal was done, you were pretty sure this would not just be a championship, but potentially a dominant championship. You didn't see any other outcome, I would say. Now you've seen how it's going in testing and heard from him. Where did you end up with? Third for him? Was that your prediction?
Yeah.
It's certainly not a failure being third in the championship after the recent seasons, but it's not what you first envisaged when you did this deal.
The thing that changed my mind more than anything was the interview, the podcast that we did with him, because I think that was genuinely him opening up a little bit and saying, I don't know where my arm is, where I am physically. I've since had conversations with people who've seen inside the box, who've seen inside the team, who've seen the data and have echoed that, because they can see on the data that he's struggling with certain things that are coming from that arm injury. And I just think that it would be a bit silly to bet on him for the title whenever I think he doesn't know if it's possible right now. Don't get me wrong, I would love it to happen, and I still stand by that if he wins the championship, it will be the single greatest comeback story in sporting history. It's right up there with pretty much anything else I can think of. It will be phenomenally good to see, but I just think there's too many question marks about his physical form more than anything else now, and I think that's what changed the most for me, because at the beginning it was, we were talking about how would he adapt to the Ducati, how would a year-old bike be, what would Gresini's team be like, but I think that has kind of crystallized into this is all about his upper right arm and what it's physically capable of, and it's going to take a time for us to see that.
Yeah, I think that element, like you say, the podcast interview, just the general vibe coming out of Marquez, I've felt has been more, no, I've still got problems. I'm still genuinely unsure of what I can do here, than any kind of mind games. And that's why I couldn't go as far as putting him proper. I think he'll be in title contention, but I think it might be a long shot all season. I think it might be a Bezzecchi style season. Part of that comes from my massive faith in Martin and the guy we're going to talk about in a minute who is top of our list. But yeah, the more we've seen through testing, the more I think we're not getting full-on Marc Marquez back. Now, Marc Marquez's talent range is such that a 95% Marc Marquez is still absolutely phenomenal and better than most of the riders on the grid. I think this is going to be an incredible season, an incredible story to watch from him. But I don't quite see him being not just champion, but not quite in real title contention either. However, the person we do think will be in title contention and potentially walking away with it, Pecco Bagnaia, almost a clean sweep. Me, Simon Val, all predicted he would be world champion again this year. Glenn, for vibes-based Marquez reasons, slightly disagreed, but I suspect Glenn's got quite a lot of faith in Bagnaia as well. However, I'm going to go first with Bagnaia because this was the prediction I had least faith in out of all of my top 10. I found it really, really hard to commit to putting Bagnaia ahead, given what I think Marquez, if he's anywhere near right, could be capable of, and given how good Martin is in my eyes and how well he performed last year. And my doubt comes from the fact that there's still been too many times through the championship seasons when Bagnaia has just wobbled a little bit, or something's gone wrong, or his margin hasn't really been what it should have been. And I still think he benefited from the mistakes Martin made and the fact he could go into the last couple of races not under such pressure last season. I still want to see a tiny bit more, which is a harsh thing to say about a double world champion. That said, his mood through testing has seemed so serene. He's had time to basically pull faces at Simon through the helmet while doing flying laps and topping tests. So there's a lot going right for Bagnaia, but I still have a slight niggle that can he really, really pull it off right to the end if he's under bigger pressure than he's been under so far.
What I would say is, I think it's unfair to tie Bagnaia's mistakes necessarily always to pressure as more than just, I think, his nature as a rider and the fact the calendar's so big now. He is not the least crash-prone rider in MotoGP. He has crashes. He falls, which means he will leave points on the table. And when there's 22 races and then 22 other races, that's going to happen from really good positions, and it's going to happen multiple times, I suspect. What I would say is I don't think he's bad under pressure. I wouldn't agree with that, or that it's a particularly even weakness compared to serene situations. Because he's excellent. And I think if you were bad under pressure, you would not be excellent defensively. But Pecco Bagnaia is just a nightmare to overtake for every MotoGP rider clearly on track. And yes, that's, strength under braking, but it's also his racer's mind and how he's able to dole out his pace exactly right over race distance, even when he wasn't 100% fit. It's not the Enea Bastianini freak late race pace thing. It's just, he really, really has learned how to play these races from a position of strength, and even sometimes from a position of weakness, but yes, more a position of, front running position. I think we've seen Bagnaia do some absolutely exceptional stuff to maximize the points that really could have been lost in those situations. And he's just fast. It's also a question of pressure. He's not just, a race merchant. He's fantastic over one lap. He's our qualifying champion. There's every chance he will be again. He's blitzed single lap records in these tests. There are weaknesses, of course there are, and you can, I think people will come to rate him more and more and more. I think this season will actually be crucial for his legacy. In not in terms of that, he's some sort of fraudulent champion or whatever. That's obviously not what I mean. But in terms of really recognizing him as an era-defining great. If he wins this season against all the other riders that have showed up at his doorstep ready to challenge him, then I think he's going into the pantheon, basically. And I think the rider to do that is kind of already there.
I think we're past the stage of Bagnaia being a bit of a fluffer under pressure. I think that there was mistakes made last season, yes, but also some of them were kind of explainable. Some of them were, a bike that kind of mysteriously stopped working for him for a considerable bit of time. And on the balance of it all, when he did have his back up against the wall, whenever he was battered and bruised after that Barcelona disaster, he came out really, really strong. And that for me was kind of the bit that highlighted that this is a bit of a changed character, that this is someone that can cope with this better. The third in the sprint and the third in the main race at Misano last year were for me probably two of his best performances, if not the two best performances of the season, in that he needed to try and control the difference to Martin. He was super, super beaten up. He was basically unable to walk, and he still, gave those two really, really strong results, those two really strong performances. That, I think, is more indicative of his season than, say, the occasional stupid crash when he shouldn't have done it, or the occasional missed opportunity to go to Q2.
I think it was pretty clear from our Marquez chat that my Marquez pick is heart ruling head, because my head is telling me Bagnaia is going to win this championship. I like that he's won his two titles in really different ways, and I think that tells you a bit more about a rider, that he doesn't need a certain set of circumstances to be able to deliver a championship. And it looks like he's probably going to have, although we talk about the front end of this grid is going to be, a swarm of Ducatis, maybe the odd sort of Binder or a Costa or a Spargaro, troubling them when they can. The difference is that he's probably going to have a bigger bike advantage over some of those Ducatis than has been the case for the last couple of years. So you've got a more refined rider who should be even more confident now that he's seen off a different type of title challenge, and he's going to have probably a bigger bike advantage than he's had in the previous 2 years where he ended up winning the championship.
I think to sort of defend myself slightly on the pressure thing, I think it's not so much I was expecting him to make more mistakes if he came under pressure. It's just you're right about the qualifying thing, Val, but I still have this tiny little doubt about whether the ultimate pace is there to keep banging out win after win in that situation like Martin was doing. Had it come down to a real win, nearly equal on points duel, would the speed have actually been there to pull it off? That's my niggle with Bagnaia. And maybe that is a sort of an unfair reflection of what you mentioned, Val, in terms of how he's perceived within motorcycle racing. Was his rise a bit too slow burn? Okay, he was a Moto2 champion against some good opposition there, Brad Binder included. But up to that point, he wasn't coming through like a Marquez, like an Acosta now. He didn't have the buzz about him that Quartararo did when he was a young teenager before that buzz disappeared, then came back again. He's just been Pecco Bagnaia, someone who's pretty good. And now he's on the brink of being Pecco Bagnaia, triple world champion at MotoGP level. That's incredible. That's a proper all-time great.
Yeah.
And there's that disparity between what you thought Bagnaia would be on the way through and what he is now that perhaps is in my head a little bit. And every time he gets beaten in a straight fight by someone who maybe shouldn't have been beaten by, or every time he falls when he's leading, that little nagging doubt comes back to go, it's Bagnaia. He's still on that development trajectory where he's still turning into the great rider he could be. But yeah, having said all that, I still think he's mega. I still think he'll be world champion this year, but that's just where my little reservation comes from.
I think part of that comes from the fact that he's very, very good at race management. I think that he's an expert at winning races, but at the slowest possible speed. Exactly. And I think that that's maybe why we didn't see like that massive run of form at the end of last season that Martin had. It was because he didn't need to. He was playing defense at that point, and he was managing the gap. He was waiting for Martin to make the occasional mistake that then meant he didn't have to go on his own, charge of his own. He was able to control it, and I think that's his single biggest strength. And maybe that's why as well we haven't seen him being the guy that everyone talked about coming through, because those guys aren't necessarily the guys that stand out in Moto3 in particular. It's, there's an intelligence to Bagnaia that not every rider has. We're seeing that right now in MotoGP from the way that he's controlling all these championships. And it's worth noting that he can do the offensive thing, because he did it against Fabio Quartararo and nearly won the title at the end of 21 with a really, really strong comeback a la Martin's last year. So I think he can do it. He just didn't need to last year.
I think Simon makes a great point there, and I think it's sort of part of what we always say about Pecco Bagnaia is that fusion of Andrea Dovizioso and Jorge Lorenzo, and the Dovizioso parts of it, and don't take this literally, he's a very handsome man, this is not a literal thing, but the Dovizioso parts of it are unsexy.
100%.
It's just not, like, talent-wise, being very, very smart and tactical and reliable over 20 laps isn't the same level of, heartbeat raising sort of excitement as just pulling out insane purple sectors that you don't see coming out of nowhere. And Pecco Bagnaia is extremely capable of that, but it feels like what he wins his championships on are the race management part of it.
Well, and I'll just say, right now, possibly more than ever, certainly in the modern era, that is a more important skill than it's been probably for a long time, because we're in this silly situation where the performance of the bikes is outgrowing the performance of the tyres. So you can't be as you put it there, Val, kind of a purple sector merchant, because you'll do what all the other quick guys are and you won't string it together because you'll keep falling off. Yeah. So Bagnaia is showing his intelligence by riding in the way that you need to ride right now to do the best job over a season. And I agree, that doesn't mean he's not capable of riding the other way if we suddenly got sort of mega tyres that could keep up with aero and all the devices and that sort of thing that these bikes have got now.
As the dedicated MotoGP journalist in this room, I just feel the need to point out that fast sectors in MotoGP are red, fast sectors in F1 are purple.
You say dedicated MotoGP journalist, but I have been made MotoGP editor in this organization, so this is awful, actually.
Yes, this is true. Yeah. This is true. But you also made a Hülkenberg reference earlier, so...
And they've been red forever as well.
Yeah.
MotoGP were putting sector times on their TV graphics 15 years before anyone in car racing was doing it, so it's completely unacceptable. I knew what a red sector was before I knew what a purple sector was.
I should say, if I can ever live any of this down, I think that I've noticed sometimes an impression from some of the feedback that people feel we're a bit low on Bagnaia, which is a little bit, I don't think whether correct or incorrect, I think it's just a funny from where it came, because originally when Ducati was just picking Bagnaia and Bagnaia was starting out as a Ducati factory rider, I think we were higher on him than the vast majority of people. I definitely remember like feeling immediately that, oh my God, Ducati has made such a right choice. They've made such a good choice. We talk about the talent ceiling and the aliens and all that, and it matters to a certain point. But like I said earlier that wins don't matter. Bagnaia is at the level where only wins matter. Wins for him have gone from not mattering to being the only thing that matters. At a certain point, I don't care what his talent ceiling is. I don't care what he'd do in a different hypothetical version of MotoGP going up against Peak, whoever. Ducati has put its entire backing behind him, and it keeps winning. And that is the only thing that matters. And whether he wins the championship or not this season, all of us know he'll win many, many, many more races and shoot up further up the all-time leaderboard because he's great. He is great.
Nobody's an accidental multiple world champion.
Absolutely not.
No. And to echo that, like, I really like the way he goes about his races. I like the fact that he goes into them with a game plan and you know, can make it work and has all these young guys trying to throw themselves at him to beat him, and then he delivers. It's the Dovey thing again. You know, the Dovey confidence going into last corners with a plan versus a lunatic Marc Marquez, will it, won't it, were some of the best racing that MotoGP's had in modern times. And Bagnaia brings that same level of strategy to it.
I think you saw that in the best Marquez Bagnaia battles that we've had so far. Was it end of 2021, Aragon? That was when I really started to think, oh yeah, Bagnaia is not just on a quick bike. He's got the racecraft. He's got the sense to, yeah, spectacular. In terms of his win rate as well, if we're just taking Grand Prix, not sprints, he's on 18 Grand Prix victories in MotoGP now. 18th on the all-time list, but actually within 7 of getting in the top 10. And I think 7 Grand Prix wins this season is not impossible for Bagnaia. And Bagnaia is an all-time top 10 great. That's when you're winning 3 world championships, you can make that kind of argument, and absolute fair play for him for getting from how he was rated to how he looks now.
The one thing that I think we need to see from him to cement any all-time great status is either him and another bike or the Ducati not quite being as good.
Yeah.
And that's not taking anything away from his abilities, and obviously he's beating 7 other really, really fast Ducatis at the minute. You know, he is the best rider on the best bike, but I'd love to see him trying something else or having to come at it from a slightly different angle with his back up against the wall a little bit, just to see, you know, whether or not there's that ability to kind of adapt.
Lord forgive me, but could you make the same argument for Jorge Lorenzo?
Yeah, but well, Jorge Lorenzo's problem is that it was almost there at Ducati. You know, he should have been the 2020 world champion in Ducati. That is, in an alternate timeline, that's a given. And I think he kind of did enough on the Ducati to prove that there was more than what there was at Yamaha. And you know, maybe that's the case with Bagnaia as well. Maybe he doesn't need to win titles on an Aprilia, but he needs to go there for 2 seasons and win a couple of races and be super strong, and then say, right, I've done it. I've proved that I'm the full thing.
It is very rare that someone in MotoGP has a bike advantage, but there's so many of them in close spec. You know, even the ones that are a year old, that they're not ancient in spec like we used to see with satellite bikes. So it's the different side of the same coin. And yes, Ducati has an advantage, and he's on the best Ducati, but there's loads of Ducatis out there, which hasn't been the case when previous brilliant champions have had the best bike. There might have been lots of people riding around on customer versions, but they weren't as close in spec as the 8 we have at the moment. So it shouldn't necessarily be used as a stick to beat him with.
I'd say that Bagnaia's situation right now is fairly unique in terms of World Championship motorsport as a whole.
Yeah.
The only thing I could really think of that it's roughly comparable to is the good old days of the 250 and 125s, whenever there was A-spec and B-spec bikes within satellite teams or within privateer teams. But at top level, you know, maybe kind of NASCAR and IndyCar that are semi-spec touch upon it, but certainly not in F1, certainly not in MotoGP. Yeah, he's in a fairly unique position.
And he's winning all those titles in that position that no one else has experienced before. It is deeply impressive. I was just going to call a halt to the episode before your last couple of points there, because Simon basically moved us on to the 2027 rider market and Aprilia signing Bagnaia so he can prove himself in a different environment. So I was like, no, if we're getting into like 3 years down the line rider market, we are absolutely done.
That's the point, yeah.
Unless that's your bombshell new prediction for 2025 after putting Martin and Bezzecchi on the Aprilia last week. Let's do our final top 10 countdown. 10th, Pedro Acosta. 9th, Maverick Vinales. 8th, Fabio Di Gianantonio. 7th, Aleix Espargaro. 6th, Marco Bezzecchi. 5th, Brad Binder. 4th, Enea Bastianini. 3rd, Jorge Martin. 2nd, Marc Marquez. 1st, Pecco Bagnaia. That is how we collectively on the Race MotoGP podcast expects the 2024 MotoGP World Championship top 10 to stand after Valencia in a long, long time. And we will revisit that prediction after Valencia and see how we did. Thank you for keeping us company through this one, listeners. It was a necessarily long one where we debated all of that. We'll be back straight after the Qatar Grand Prix when we'll have seen some actual racing, which will help inform how wrong or right we were. And Simon, I believe, will be recording that one from an airport, which last time ended in an argument with a passerby that we didn't include in the episode. Let's see how this one goes. We'll speak to you after Sunday's race.
The Athletic.